Right, I've called out the bat signal. My old podcast host, Maurice, Brosnan, and Mark Farrelly are joining us now. Delighted to have you back, lads, for one last kind of roundtable chat. And of course, we had to do it after the All-Ireland football final. Mark, we haven't spoke to you all year, really. Me and Maurice are having these weekly chats, and I notice you're kind of getting a little bit jealous of them. You're sort of sending tweet threads every week, kind of backing up our points. I just felt like you were missing out on these chats.
Exactly, Mick. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Delighted to be on the show.
Yeah, well, let's have the chat then, because it was the All-Ireland final. We've already obviously talked in detail about the match with Darren and Stephen there, but Maurice, I don't know, I think there's a feeling that I have anyway that the story of the fairy tale and then the fairy tale sad ending about Mayo is completely overshadowing the fact that Tyrone won this amazing All-Ireland that had this amazing story in the middle of it with the COVID and everything that was gone before, but ultimately beat the Ulster champions, Donegal, Monaghan, Kerry, and then a Mayo team who only had to turn up to win the All-Ireland and beat them all well. Like a really, really brilliant All-Ireland by a team in its first management in its first campaign, etc., etc. It's actually an incredible story that nobody's talking about.
Yeah, I think they're two connected things, Mick. We might talk about this again in a second, but I do think, we presume we have narratives in our heads, and when things don't necessarily fit within that narrative, there's just no space for it. So, a lot of people find it very hard to square how does this Tyrone team concede 6 goals in Killarney, a new management coming in, this idea that they need to throw off the shackles and move on from the Mickey Harte era, with suddenly this team who just, convincingly and dominantly stormed to an Ireland title. And similarly, you have all the narrative around Mayo and they're finally their time is right and surely they can't lose again. And suddenly it becomes very, very hard to square it with the fact that, it was in a final that we saw, this wasn't a final where there was actually any space for, as much as people were trying to cast it, there's no space for the idea that this was about hard luck or curses or, near misses or red cards or whatever you want to call it. This was just a good team being beaten by a much better team. Ultimately they just weren't good enough. And I know that's, a lot of people look at that simplistic, but that's just what happens. I don't know how much more convincing you can say it. And, from Tyrone's perspective, they won't care. I think they've nearly thrived off certain narratives going around about them. But yeah, to my mind, the story of this game isn't anything of that. It's just purely straight and simple. A better team beat a good team, and that, for as much as ways you want to dress it up, that's what happened.
Yeah, on the day as well. Mayo's goal chances and everything else like that, Mark, are just one thing, really, aren't they? That was how the game transpired. I feel like that there's a certain, let's face it, a dub element going around social media, lads, who are kind of suggesting that because Mayo missed goal chances, Tyrone are actually shit, and in fact, maybe Dublin are the team that everybody should be looking for after winning the last 6 All-Irelands in a row.
I thought Tyrone were fairly comfortable in that second half. They could have gotten, if they needed it, they could have gotten a lot more scores. Even Jarrett Canavan fisted that ball over the bar. There was the ball was just over the bar after Canavan missed the goal chance as well. There were 2 goal opportunities if they needed to take them. And the other thing is, people kind of, because it's Mayo and because it's county and because of all the fans or whatever, and they're on this incredible epic journey, that that's the kind of narrative, as Maurice saying, you're going with. But really, this Mayo team are only in their second year and they've been in 2 All-Ireland finals. Yeah. The Tyrone team that actually won yesterday have had a lot more heartbreak than most of the Mayo players. Nearly all of the Mayo players, bar maybe 4 or 5 on that team. They've been winning, they've been getting All-Star nominations, winning All-Stars for years. I was actually adding up there this morning. They had that team that played yesterday, that took the pitch yesterday, they have had 21 All-Star nominations between them. And that's come back to 2013 when Matty Donnelly had his first All-Star nomination. So they can see how long this Tyrone team have been on the road. And all right, you've got Aiden O'Shea, Kevin McLaughlin, Lee Keegan, Paddy Durkin to a lesser extent come in more recently, a little bit more recently. But aside from that, there's even if you look at the Tyrone players that are kind of the, whatever you would call them, I suppose, the new breed or the new leadership group within the team in terms of McGeary, Myler, Sludden, these guys have been around for years. Whereas O'Donoghue, Conroy, they're all still fresh. Even Oisin Mullen and O'Hora, they're all kind of, it's not the same Mayo team that was losing all those All-Ireland finals to Dublin. No. It's a different team, and their time, hopefully, for Mayo people will still come. It's an incredible experience to be in 2 All-Ireland finals, and that in such a short period of time, for a team that was in transition.
Yeah. They should be able to kick on, especially if, like, if the players that are coming are as good as Aiden O'Shea and Lee Keegan and so on, when these guys do have to transition out the last group. But look, I mean, losing 7 All-Ireland finals for Lee Keegan and Aiden O'Shea, these are the guys that you're going to think of and are going to be the ones that, and Kevin McLaughlin obviously are going to be the ones that take the majority of when you talk about the heartache. But I completely agree. But I actually was immediately after the game. It was just before Peter Harte ended up being interviewed, and I was just thinking about Morgan, about Donnelly and him. And I was just thinking, like, they've had their journey as well. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. They've been through the whole thing. You nearly think of those guys, Maurice, as being part of that old team. You kind of don't remember. You think of 08, 05, 08 and that brilliant Tyrone team. You kind of, if you told me that Niall Morgan was knocking around there, I'd agree with you for a second before common sense kind of took over, and how long.
Peter Harte, especially.
Peter Harte, definitely. I'm shocked that he hadn't played already in the All-Ireland final, by the way.
But Peter Harte and Matty Don. It's interesting if you want to chart their journeys respectively. And I thought it was like Peter Harte's interview after the game was just class, and to see that kind of how emotional he was. But you think back about his Tyrone senior career and 2008, Tyrone winning All Ireland. This is the greatest team of the Naughties, greatest team of the decade. It's absolutely there. His uncle is over the senior team. He's playing in the minor final. They all play Mayo in that game. And they win on Ireland, and they go into a squad. And Peter Harte has spoken about this like a lot through the years. He felt that he couldn't be like he was expected. There was a lot of hype around that team because they had finally a young crop. And I don't know if you remember that 2008, but the narrative before that game was that this Tyrone team were on their last legs. And even Enda McGinley has spoken in the past about the idea that they're leaving Newry, they lose the down. We did owe it to this team to have one final crack. And then suddenly they have this glut of young players, and there's a lot of expectation that they can carry the mantle. And Peter Harte and Matty Donnelly, the two who are on that team, have spoken about. Peter Harte said he found it very hard to be vocal in that dressing room because he's sharing a dressing room with, in some cases people have won 3 All-Ireland medals. How are you supposed to speak up? You kind of bow to that. And then so that not only is that a huge amount of pressure, it's also a probably unfair expectation that he's coming into that. And suddenly, you look at, you want to talk about near misses, go back to 2015, 2016, both of those years. I think Matt Downey definitely won an All-Star both of the years. I think Peter Harte won 1 in those years. You go ahead, 2018, I don't know if you remember when they played Dublin in that final, they were 5 points up. And I firmly believe that was Tyrone, that was their belief. And suddenly afterwards, I think, if we don't get it now, when do we get it? Mickey Harte goes, I don't know, externally, there definitely wasn't that much expectation that they would get it now. And then it all comes to fruition wonderfully at the end of the game. I think Peter Harte kind of embodied that, the fact that, he's not, you definitely wouldn't accuse him of lagging. If anything, he was one of the best players. He's guaranteed All-Star this year. And, Matty Donnelly probably joins him in that as well.
How much is the narrative with Tyrone all year is that they've expanded what they do. So it's all loads of really, really good players, but now they attack more, and it isn't as negative and it isn't as restrictive, I suppose. Is there any way in that this is a narrative versus reality situation, or is that actually completely true? Like that there is obviously there's a change and there's an evolution, I would say. A lot of people on TV say evolvement, but that is there. But is it as massively transformative as has been made out? It's a completely different style.
I remember laughing at after the Cavan game when Mickey Harte was on, I think it was the BBC podcast, and asked Mickey, was he seeing a big change from when Tyrone, when he was managing Tyrone? And he was like, well, I saw a big change from when they played against Kerry in the league. That was definitely a change of style there. But so I think it is.
Actually, do you know what though? That actually makes my point, because that whole thing, that's where that all started. Tyrone are trying things or whatever. They've conceded 1 goal since then.
Yeah.
In all of their games. And they're not wide open or anything.
There's definitely there's more of a directness to them, and they are a bit more they're a bit more positive in that they're probably not in the fact they're not keeping a permanent sweeper, like when Colin Kavanagh was the permanent sweeper for them, and they're going man to man, they're taking more risks. But at the same point, I don't know why it's always like, obviously we want to see why it's different, and they talk about obviously the brilliant job the lads have done in their first year of management, but teams and players take stuff from every manager they've had. So it's an accumulation of things. You can't have that Tyrone team that you had yesterday winning the All-Ireland final, and you can't have the types of players that they had on that team without Mickey Harte. Mickey Harte, again, you go back to that podcast, it's a really interesting one to listen to, because he maintains, he's like, there's no thing as forwards and defenders and sacrificing your game and all this nonsense. It's the team. And like, nobody embodies that, like the likes of Conor Myler, the likes of McGeary, the likes of Niall Sludden. So those players have been formed by Mickey Harte. They've been molded in that sort of image. Brian Dooher, actually the exact same, who's now the manager. So it kind of the same with Joe McMahon in the backroom team as well. So like, they've progressed it, they've brought it on, but it's always an accumulation of all the experience. Come back to whatever managers the lads would have had at underage level and everything. That it's a story that's been written by all the management teams and the players that have come before, rather than just sort of starting afresh, I think.
And I suppose what I'm saying is they're obviously doing more. Like, I mean, how many scores did McNamee and Hampsey and all get over the course of the year? Like, there obviously are, and it's a certain way, it's a certain style of things. But I'm wondering, is that just like, was that the natural progression anyway of the way they were doing things and the way the game is going, Maurice? Like, and again, this isn't to take any credit away from anyone. I'm just wondering, is sometimes we could pretend that a switch was flicked and it was the difference between Tyrone being nearly men and All-Ireland champions, whereas actually Mark's point 10 minutes ago was this is a culmination of many years' work and a lot of heartache and not as new a team, I suppose, as Mayo, who haven't gone through that yet, despite the narrative that they have.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Marcus hit the nail on the head there. To my mind, it's a subtle change, but it's also a significant change. So, I think the biggest change, if you were to watch Tyrone, and you expect, the best way you can see this is if you see the behind the camera angles, and that their players, even though they're staying goal side, that's what they've always done. They've always played matched up for players, played goal side. When they're out of possession, they had an inclination before, particularly under Mickey Harte, to get back behind the ball, so retreat to the 45 and then kind of try and press there and be very difficult to break down there. Whereas now, when they lose the ball, they're still boxing off man to man. So they're still goal side, like they're still dropping off the ball, but they're pressurizing further up the field. So it's a subtle change. And I think it makes a massive difference in the way teams play against you. Because if you're dropping back ahead of the ball, it gives teams the option. If I drop off a player in my half, they suddenly have a kick pass option because there's nobody standing in front of them. So if they can get that off quickly, it makes you vulnerable. Whereas the amount of times where, it's funny, Mick, we're talking about narratives there and about this key to the game. And I think it's interesting that Kerry concede 3-14, isn't it, after extra time against Tyrone, and their problem is their defence. And Mayo concede 2-14 against Tyrone, and their problem is their attack. It's interesting that this way comes around. And to my mind, that it just goes to show that that just feeds into narrative. Realistically, the biggest difference to me is that kind of middle third. I think Mayo were absolutely bullied in their middle third. They lost the midfield battle. They lost that middle zone battle. And the biggest inclination of that is when you look at just before half time, Mayo kicked 5 balls in a row, 5 balls into their full forward line. So, this idea that they ran every ball, they didn't. Like the first ball, this started when Aiden O'Shea's chance when he's blocked down by Ronan McNamee. That was the first one. Now, that was an incredible pass by Ryan Runahoo. O'Shea gets the ball, turns, is blocked down. That actually ends up going up the other end and a score. A couple of minutes later, Brian Walsh kicks, do you remember that? Like just an aimless ball in on top of Niall Morgan, actually comes off his line, catches it. And Morgan, this is the one where he drives up to the halfway line, launches a big massive kick over the top. It breaks. McCurry has his goal chance, kicks the ball, and it doesn't work out. Lee Keegan kicks the ball to Aiden O'Shea. I don't know if you remember this. And Durkin was coming on the loop, runs down a blind alley, turns around, gives the ball back to Ryan O'Donoghue, who kicks a crazy pass across the field. That's intercepted. It breaks down again. A couple of minutes later, the very good pass, Kevin McLaughlin kicks to Aiden O'Shea, and he catches it on the edge of the D. He's fouled, wins his free. The Brian Dunn who kicks the score. And the final one is another pass into Aiden O'Shea. Gives the ball off. He gives a hand pass to who got pulled down just before half time, Parker Hora, and that's the one when he gets pulled down. It's another free. So to my mind, right, people look at that and say, like, what's the problem? Is Aiden O'Shea the problem? Is Mayo's defence the problem? And I think the problem there is that you didn't get enough after middle third. So they're kicking ball in. There's no second phase to follow up on that. The balls they are kicking in, like Loftus, Brian Walsh wasted, Ruan, Paddy Durkin even wasted so much possession. Like when you look back on it, Brian Walsh misses that chance in the first half. He kicks an aimless ball in on top of the goalkeeper. He carries it he gets turned over and carries it in when he's turned around. Same thing happens to Paddy Durkin a second later. And then he has the goal. Well, you can call it a goal or a point chance where you just blast the ball wide in the second half. So that's an example of not getting enough out of your middle third players. And going back to this is a very long way to going back to where this all started. You look on the flip side of that, and what does Tyrone do? And the example for this, to me, the classic example of this yesterday of the guy who does that middle third job perfectly is Conor Myler. because Conor Myler, when he's out of possession, is up, he's pressing Durkin, he's in his face. When the ball is kicked, then he's like the engine, he's athletic enough to cover back. So say, for example, he's pushing Durkin, he's pressing, Mayo go long, ball goes into Aiden O'Shea, and Aiden O'Shea breaks it out in front of him, and who's there to hoover up in front of him? Conor Myler, because he's dropped off, gets in, gets hammered by his leg. Anytime time he's getting on the ball, his onus is to try and, he's giving you that kind of variation that you want on the ball. So he's well able to kick past the ball inside, as he did, several times. The goal is the best example. That's example exactly what you want of that middle third player. And he's just, and going back to the point at the very start, he's just an evolution of previously we saw similar players in that role, but maybe their inclination was they lose the ball, drop to, you used to hear, like you used to be at Tyrone, and you'd hear the shout 46. And everybody knows that's at club games. You hear that they're getting back to just protect that line just in front of the 45, set up there, be very, very solid there. Whereas Myler has that bit more inclination, like it's slightly less conservative, where he's still going to press you, he still is going to retreat, but just slightly higher up the field. And it's a small change, but it also is a big change, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. The other thing is probably, obviously McCurry's the big kind of difference that you can see, that of like that kind of permanent presence with him and McKenna up on the full forward line. I know it wasn't like they weren't going with long kickouts back when Harte was in charge, but it didn't seem as striking or successful. Like, would that second goal have happened if they weren't playing the way they are?
There was 2 kickouts, like in the 10 minutes before I tweeted it yesterday. There was 2 Morgan kickouts that were just inch perfect, that they won the exact same possession from. Maurice, you've been talking about them all year, dropping on the inside the 45, like it's unbelievable, the accuracy. And like, in fairness, he was well helped by the midfielders as well. 2 goal chances. They actually got nothing out of it. It was in that period where Mayo had the chance when Tyrone weren't scoring in the first quarter, the third quarter of the game, and Mayo didn't capitalize. But there were 2 huge chances, and then they got the goal straight out. Like, I literally sent a tweet saying Tyrone aren't capitalizing on these Morgan kickouts, and then they immediately capitalized and scored a goal from it. And it was like, it was coming, I think, is the point. And I don't think we can overestimate how big the tactical decision to go for more of those type of kickouts are, and second, the ability of the goalkeeper to be able to drop them on a sixpence from, what is he kicking them, like 70 yards, 80 yards? Like, it's unbelievable the amount of distance he's getting on them. Like, they're being caught at their highest point almost as well. It's like,
but isn't it such a testament to his, like, Mark, you tweeted about this recently. Like, I think it's the ultimate testament to his ability not to be influenced by, like, he got a lot of stick over the kickouts against Kerry, and the difference in terms of where he's landing them, the difference isn't that big. The real difference is that he doesn't have David Moran in his way. So like, he just sticks to the process. I know people don't like when I'm saying that, but the outcome, the whole point for him is that I put the ball there, I have done my job. Whether or not they win the ball, I'll get the blame if they don't win the ball. I probably won't get the credit if they do win the ball. Kennedy or McKenna get the credit, but all he's doing is sticking to that process over and over again.
Yeah, it's like, they're like darts. And so there's some. Do you ever watch games, and it's almost like there's a set thing in play that you're expecting. So like yesterday, you're looking at it and you're expecting. You see Mayo and they win a break, and they're coming forward at 100 miles an hour, and they're someone off the shoulder, and they're moving the ball, and you're so used to seeing Mayo do that you're expecting, they're going to be bearing down and goal now. Like, here's what's going to happen, and then all of a sudden, they just had to take a solo and turn around and fist it out to the sideline to someone. It was like they just were hitting, especially once Tyrone got that bit of a cushion, come the final quarter, or even with 20 minutes ago. I actually thought the penalty, I think penalty was overrated as a kind of a turning point. I thought Tyrone, like, it was almost nearly against the run of play a bit there, especially the fact that it came from a free that it dropped short. And it showed you, like, even if you go back to what you were saying, Maurice, about Conor Myler, like, if you compare that example where the Kim Whelan, I think, pointed, or maybe it was Oisin McConnell, pointed out on the Saturday game nighttime show, where people were trying to get a hand on him and he was just soloing back. He wasn't trying to take it into the tackle or anything, and then waited for the perfect opportunity to give a great pass. Whereas Mayo players they did that all right. They weren't as bad as Kerry. They didn't take it into the tackle too much, but then they'd end up taking a pot shot from 40 yards and just kind of skying it off the outside the boot or something that went straight up in the air. There seemed to be a lot of that going down the final furlong, especially, that they were just making the wrong decisions, even though, and it was brought on by Tyrone pressure, even though you might actually see a Tyrone player hounding them down to block them or anything as they were taking the shot.
What about, go on, sorry, Maurice.
Just like I agree with that, but the only thing I would add to that is if you look at the shot map for the second half from where Mayo took their shots, they're taking them from the efficient position. They're fairly centralized. They're working them into the right place. But the fact is that they either they're the wrong shooters. You've got like I think it's unfair to signal out too many players, but the amount of times Conor Loftus came in off the wing, dropped one short, carried into contact. A minute later, ballooned another one wide when he rebounded in off the right wing and kicked the ball off. Jordan Flynn comes on. The very first thing he does is win a ball. Aiden O'Shea standing behind him on the 45. Like, he's at the top of the D. I mean, I don't understand. Cohen and Flynn missed chances from the top of the D. And as harsh as this is to say, like, that's, you can say that's poor selection. That's down to pressure. To my mind, that's just down to ability. Just, you've got a very mobile, very fit players in that middle third, in the likes of Brian Walsh, McLaughlin, I thought yesterday, Paddy Durkin. But when it comes down to it, they couldn't execute their shots. And you compare that to, Park Campsey has hit 3 outside of his right boot points in this year's championship. Like, that is just perfect execution. He knows exactly what he's doing. Niall Sutton, I think, has he 10 shots in the championship. He's kicked 8 points again on outside the right boot, probably half of them. They have that in their lock here. And I think
McNamee is scoring points. Yes,
Gary's scored. And I know this is going to. People are going to be really annoyed by this, Mick. Like, but to my mind, what it comes down to is Mayo just don't have that in it. They just don't have that ability.
This is what it comes down to for me, for ability. Yeah, whatever. But like this, it goes back to the conversation we were having about the Irish football team last week and about like Gavin Bazunu being part of the team as opposed to if only for the goalkeeper. Taking your chances is part of being a football team. And it's like this idea that, Mayo squandered chances, therefore, they didn't have the players to do that. And it's like, I think there's somewhere in between like the pot shots, because it did seem panicky, Maurice, despite what the map says, and what you're saying of them not having the ability to get the right players or not having enough of the right players to be taking those shots. It's a huge part of them not just being good enough at the moment, and that's fine. They're on early in their journey. Maybe they get there. Maybe there's a couple of players that come through, so on.
The other just thing,
because I do think it's important to talk about him. You mentioned all the things he was doing there earlier. It's another All-Ireland final without him scoring at 7. To my mind, and I just watched him really closely yesterday, he won, say, for example, both the throw-ins really aggressively at the start of the game and at the second half. Second half, when he won it, got all the space in the world, then kicked it into 50 yards of space, and I think got out for a sideline. But it felt to me immediately, he's like, I'm trying to make the mark in this game. He got the chance he kicked wide in the first half. He had made a brilliant run. He called for it. I've never seen a player so vocal about looking for the ball, got it, then popped it wide. And you're like, oh, Jesus, it's going to be another one of these Aiden O'Shea days. But his game isn't only built around whether he's scoring or not. But I think that's a way a lot of people are just going to look at it and say, Aiden O'Shea bottles it in the finals. Not a big occasion player, full stop. I'm just going to let you debunk that theory if it is worth debunking.
Yeah, I find I think I'm kind of been corrupted by the online discourse around this game, because I find myself
it's the only thing I'm thinking of. It's completely
I'm about to jump to Aiden O'Shea's defense here when I don't think he played that well. It will lead me to over exaggerate what I'm trying to do, because we're just living in these total extremes. So Aiden O'Shea, to my mind, was not Mayo's problem yesterday. As I said, I think the problem was that middle third. They're just a couple of tiers below what you need from. Man, we talked about this before the Kerry game. Now, you could go back, and I think Aiden O'Shea was totally let down, but tactically, by the way they set up yesterday. In that, what does he do well? It's getting on ball, it's forcing turnovers, laying it off. That's his skill set. So if you go back to the first thing he does, as you mentioned, Mick, wins a throw in, gives the ball to Tommy Conroy, score. Wins the ball out on the sideline, storms past Tyrone and McNamee, gives the ball off to Tommy Conroy. Conroy's fouled, free, score. Wins the ball the edge of the fouled. But right, that's another score. Wins the ball out in front, gives the ball off to Pork O'Hora. O'Hora's dragged down, score. He also, the Ryan O'Donoghue, I don't know if you remember the one I talked about in the first half, when he just kicked like a diagonal ball across from the 45. I don't know who it was meant for, but Myler won it and took it up the field anyway. That whole play started by a really good pass by Keegan forward. Aiden O'Shea out in front, wins it, gives it off to Durkin. He gives it to O'Donoghue does that. So that's the first half. I actually think he had a pretty good game, other than the miss particularly, and he also, as you mentioned, kicked that wide in his left as well. Now in the second half, he's on the periphery of the game. He's, on the edge of the square. The amount of times where, as I mentioned, Tommy Conroy doesn't square the ball back across for his missed goal chance, the one when he breaks over the back, kicks it on his right, puts it wide. Aiden O'Shea is screaming for the ball across the square, doesn't get the ball. Jordan Flynn has a chance to give him the ball, doesn't give him the ball. Brian Walsh is one on his right foot. O'Shea is standing on the edge of the square, he doesn't give the ball. Now I would say, not to go too pop psychology here, but I would say part of that is down to the fact that they might not have necessarily a huge amount of trust in his finishing ability. So he's not getting the ball, which to my mind, so you're looking at this game, and I mean, I don't know, I'd love to hear what you think about this, but I thought Horan's attitude line was quite defeatist, and maybe I'm jumping to assumptions here, his body language, but I also think, that just might be an image, a spectacle, whatever you want to call it. But I also think their lack of intervention there, to the fact that you're getting cleaned out in the middle of the field, like Brian Kennedy and Conn Kilpatrick are getting more and more on top. They're starting to win kickouts. Your rate of turnovers is decreasing dramatically. So what you need a big presence in midfield, somebody who can force turnovers, win kickouts, lay the ball off, and you've Aiden O'Shea stand on the edge of the square. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand why they persisted with that for 35 minutes. And the only time Aiden O'Shea comes out is when Derek Hanneman comes on, and he's chased Derek Hanneman back when Derek Hanneman has his goal chance, which isn't a skill set either. I'd love to know what you think, because maybe that's, I'm not saying that he had a great game. I thought he had a good first half and totally faded in the second half, but I think it was more to do with what was going on around him than it was with him himself.
What do you think, Mark?
I don't know. I don't know why the narrative is always around Aiden O'Shea. He's captain, I know, and everything, but he was quiet, I thought, in the second half. But again, if you're pointing out to the big mistakes or the things that we're talking about, just as what Tyrone would would lure you into making, he wasn't probably one of the players. I can't remember any off the top of my head that that he caused issue. As Maurice said, he was laying it off quickly. He was a focal point of thought for the attack. He was even if he wasn't doing a whole pile, he takes watching, and he can't just go, oh, we're not going to worry about this target man in on the square and just go off and play around. So I thought, and he was very good at bringing other players into the game. If we look at the other side, Ryan Donoghue alongside him was extremely busy, but then made mistakes on the ball, but he was on it more often. So it's very hard to balance it. It's very hard to balance it out in terms of what the issue is. But I'm kind of tired of this, this Aiden O'Shea score, Mayo are, again, we talked about with Tyrone in terms of the team, an experienced team, they're a team of whatever that come on yesterday, 21, 22 players, and we're still talking about Aiden O'Shea. I don't know. Specifically, but on social media and everything.
Yeah, no, sure, I know. But he's marking a very good player as well. I mean, there was one ball that was sent into him, Maurice, that was it was really obviously to try and get a mark, which I think was probably the only time that happened yesterday. And McNamee was just perfect. It was just perfect defending. And there's not much you can do about that. You know what I mean? There is this idea, we talked about it with Darren at the start of the year, of there could be something very interesting in having Aiden O'Shea just as his focal point full forward and everybody working around him. But the better the teams you come up against, the harder that is. That's not as simple as it sounds to just have this big, ball winning full forward.
The other thing is it takes exactly what you were saying earlier on, Maurice, sorry to cut out, but it's Aiden O'Shea can't be a brilliant target, or any player can't be a brilliant target man full forward if you don't have the second phase coming off you, if it's not been kicked into you. There's it's a whole structure and a game plan that needs to come off. And again, if Tyrone are blocking out that middle, protecting around the D, then it's not on as much. You can't. It's very hard to come running out. The one he got with Pádraig O'Hora was a perfect example of it. But again, I think that ended up being a fist pass in, or it was very tight the way it came off. It's not easily done. O'Shea would really well to win it. Harte was coming right on him, just the exact perfect timing in terms of his run. And it's difficult when you're against a Tyrone team that defend as well as you were saying, Mick, that just have not just McNamee but the entire defensive unit.
Yeah. Did you think it was a good All-Ireland final, Mark? Because I just think there's things we haven't talked about. Conor McKenna's no-look pass, I feel like, should be a bigger deal today.
Oh, that was unbelievable.
And for me, I don't know. I thought that Colin McShane's goal was really underrated, because I thought that he just knew exactly where Henley was at all times, and just the casualness to just be able to fist the ball in the opposite way than you think it's going to in the air. There are 2 goals like straight away that I think that are not being talked about enough today. But at the same time, you mentioned this earlier. Maybe Tyrone were in the penalty might not have been as big a turning point, etc., etc. I felt that Tyrone were in control for the whole second half. I felt it was Dublin. Mayo were way less behind than they were at times against Dublin in the second half, but I felt it was over, whereas I never did.
Yeah, I had the same
4
feeling.
weeks ago,
And that's, I don't know what it was. It's just,
yeah.
And like that's what people might be watching going, what are you talking about? It was like the Mayo penalty was against one play. They're after coming back to like 2 points down, and it was and it's like, I was like, there's just something I felt. There's always, we were talking earlier on with the glitches in the system or whatever that go and Mayo attack. That there's another one where Tyrone. I actually thought in the first half I was like, Tyrone seemed to be able to smell or like hear indecision or mistakes, because they're just when they actually go and they go to swarm in on you. They're so perfectly well, or so good at timing it. And I swear to God, about 20 seconds later, it happened where I think it might have been Walsh. I could be wrong. It was some Mayo player was coming running through at full tilt, and you could see in his eyes that he was looking to give it to someone off the shoulder, and he realised, oh, there's nobody there. But at the exact same time, it seemed like 10 Tyrone players realised, oh, there's nobody there, and he wants to pass it. Let's get in on top of him now that he's kind of distracted with indecision, and they just dispossess him straight away. And it's like when you see that happen time and time again, it kind of grinds you down. And I just thought that no matter what Mayo did, Tyrone would end up doing the same thing, which is kind of what happened in the end.
Yeah, that's actually just your voice, because it grinds you down. Whereas like Dublin had them beaten, but they kept letting them in, which actually lifts you. It's almost the opposite. Yeah. It keeps you going for the next phase and the next phase and so on and so forth. Whereas it was the opposite yesterday. Did you think it was a good match, Maurice?
Memorable. I don't know. I think the first half was very entertaining. But I think the missed chances that we were talking about in the second half, where like the incident Mark described there, there's 3 different examples of that came to my mind as he's talking there. There was the Brian Walsh one, there was the one where Jordan Flynn fell on the ground and threw the ball backwards, and there was a Paddy Durkin one when he got called for overcarrying. So you can take your pick which one he's talking about. And I think when you see that happen, when you see the 2 shots that I mentioned by Conan Flynn on the edges where Loftus's 3, Brian Walsh's miss, it sucks the life out of the. Not only does it definitely affects Mayo in terms of, I just think it must be so disencouraging when you see you keep missing these chances that you're creating over and over and over. But it also sucks the life out of the game. I find anyway. Like I do think it really emphasizes that this game is a couple of notches below the quality that we might have seen of the. I don't know, make your choice of Mayo 2017, for example, or whatever you want. But it really underlines the fact that, like Mick, I talked to you about this. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I don't know. I think like some people don't seem to like the idea. I do think football, for the first time in my lifetime, as terms of collective quality, has gotten slightly worse. I do think. No, I don't think that has any impact on respect, because I think games are more entertaining when there's more turnovers, but definitely in terms of just in terms of cohesion, decision making, collective attack, and defensive structures, I do think we're a couple of pegs below where we were in 2017, 2018, for example. Now, I think it's totally understandable when you can't, contact time and possessions are as reduced as they were, and this is a consequence of it. But yeah, for me, it was a couple of pegs below the kind of I definitely wouldn't have been deeming it a classic, for example.
There's one thing as well. I was thinking this just at half. You say you're doing all the previews and you're listening to preview things and never football matches, and you'd always hear this kind of like, it's nearly cliche at this stage of, the bench is so important, and it's the people who finish around the pitch at the end are just as important as who start the thing. But you're kind of, I think we're all just paying lip service to that. And it's only when you actually, because you're kind of like analysing the game, it's like, this is a toss-up, Tyrone, Mayo, who's going to, and then obviously Tyrone have a better bench than Mayo. And you don't really take that, I don't think, fully appreciate that until it gets to halftime and Tyrone are ahead. And you're almost like, geez, we need to do another preview show here for this game, this second half, because there's no point in, the halftime analysis is actually pointless, because within 15, 20 minutes, it's a different team. The 2 different teams that are going to be on the pitch, and there's going to be a team with Colin McShane in it, a team with Derek Canavan in it. There was other players who could have come on. Taylor McKenna come on at the end, but there's so many players come on for Donaghy as well to come on for Tyrone. And you're like, when you think of that, you're like, Jesus, like I can't see the Mayo team that's going to play this. That's going to be coming down the home straight at the minute, being able to match that Tyrone team, because Colin McShane is an all-star. Taylor McCann, definitely all-star nominated. I'm not sure if he ever actually won one. Derek Canavan is proclaimed the son of God by some people. So like, and then you look who's involved. Look at the people that are involved. Then coming down the whole shit, it is Canavan, it is McShane. So but and then the other thing, Mick, just to go back to the point, the 2 goals definitely need to be talked about because they were just a joy. Like, I mean, Mayo, fair play to them, they're really brave. They always, the defenders mark from in front. It looks great when they're coming out and winning ball in front, but the one thing you don't want when you're like that is what happened to poor O'Shea with that goal for McShane, which is a long ball in over the top when you don't know where your man is because he's behind you and you're not fully sure you're backpedaling trying to get up to it. So that was a brilliant pass in by Myler and a great fist by McShane.
Like, and that's we don't talk about anything that Conor Myler does in the last third unless he's harrying and doing all the things Maurice was talking about, but a great footballer as well. Like,
and then McKenna's pass, I actually was going, what's he doing? I
thought he'd run into trouble when he had the chance to shoot, and he knew exactly what he was doing. You could see in the third replay, I think, from behind the goal, Maurice's favourite angle, you could see that he spotted him early and never looked again. Never moved his eyes even until the ball was out of his hands. Like, it was brilliant. And McKenna is someone, lads, that is so close to being a superstar, isn't he? Like, he keeps doing 3 or 4 magic things a game, but kind of disappointing a little bit. Like, I know that's a really unfair thing to say. It's like he's been back, what now? Like, is it 18 months or whatever? Like, you know what I mean?
Came back November last year, so not even.
It goes to your point about COVID training and everything else. Like, you know what I mean? He hasn't had a full go at it, but you kind of feel like he could be. You build a full forward line in the future around the fully fit McShane, McCurry, and McKenna, and it's going to take some beating, like, isn't it?
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. Sean Kavanagh talking last night about when he got down onto the pitch and talking to a couple of the younger lads like Conor Myler, he said, and Kieran McGeary, and them saying it feels like they're club teams and the lack of ego and this kind of talking about, collective ability, the idea that they don't care who gets the plaudits. And like, a lot of people dismiss it as cliched, but I do think McKenna is kind of the epitome of that for me. He's working back like a dog. Now I think he conceded 5 frees yesterday. So some of them were fairly obvious. The one when he bulldozed Lee Keegan in the back when he was storming down the middle, like that could have easily been a yellow. And then suddenly he's skating into nice. But just to see him back and doing that kind of dirty work, coming out winning frees, the ball he gave for McCurry's gorgeous first point on his left foot. McKenna wins the ball in the middle, turns, give the kick pass in. McCurry kicks the ball over the bar. I also think just make a separate to all that. It's just such a nice story, isn't it? Like this guy who like leaves in 2014, leaves his first game was watching Tyrone in All Ireland in 2005. That was his first time going to a game. He leaves in is in Melbourne. It's very well publicized at this stage how homesick he was. Like in 2018, he's in his apartment, watching through gritted teeth as their under-21s, the team he was part of, are in an All Ireland final. Goes through what he did in 2020, all the while is like thinking of home, longing for home. The whole time they're trying to alleviate it. I don't know if it's fully appreciated just to the extent that like the club tried to. I spoke to Dan Richardson this week, who was the general manager of Essendon while McKenna was there. He's actually, his father is Barry Richardson, who he started the entire process of bringing Irish players over. He was the guy who scouted Sean White and Jim Steins. This is back in the 80s, right? So this guy knows exactly, and he will speak to you like very, very fondly of how the McKenna's regard for home and how much the club appreciated that. I understand McKenna had offers to get out of Melbourne if he wanted to, like very lucrative offers if he wanted to go somewhere else, but he didn't want. It wasn't about that. He just wanted to get home, get playing for Tyrone, get back to his family. And the fact that he does that, and within 12 months as an Ireland medal, I just think it's a lovely story. You couldn't help but be delighted for him, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to get to Team of the Year stuff and wrap up for ages. I keep asking extra questions, but Joel, I actually feel like I have to mention, I've been dismissive of Mayo's heartbreak because I wanted to talk about Tyrone, but let's talk about Mayo's heartbreak because I was like, this is amazing, lads. Forget about the 11 All-Irelands or whatever. Think about the fact that in the last 10 years, they have played in 6 All-Ireland, 7 All-Ireland finals now, is it? Sorry, I'm after losing track there, but is it 7 or 6? 6, isn't it?
6, I think.
6 All-Ireland finals. People are saying people are counting the replay, aren't they? In 2017.
Oh,
that's what confused me.
If you actually go back to 1989, I was reading the RTE report, they've lost 33% of all Ireland finals played since 1989.
But so they've played, I suppose, the Mayo since they last won one, have played in 13 All-Ireland finals and not won any of them. They've drawn 2. But in I suppose, year by year, it's 11 All-Ireland finals. And this team, or some of this team, have lost 6 in the last 10 years. Mentioning how amazing a record it is to even get to that. In 3 of the other 4 years, they were in All-Ireland semi-finals. In 2 of those 3, they lost in a replay. This is insane, the run that Mayo are on in general. And they just, I personally think, have never been the best team, have been the second best team. They might have been like 1A in 2016 and 2017 to the best team of all time in their actual prime. Like it's insane how unlucky they've got in that respect. But have they actually got unlucky as such in any particular games? I don't know. I'm not so sure they've left any behind them as such. But I can't help but look at like Lee Keegan yesterday and just feel like I've always been so 50-50 on Mayo. I watch these games thinking it's such an amazing sports story that they can't win. And the longer it goes and the higher the numbers are, the better a sports story it is. And I'm a neutral. I don't care about Mayo, so therefore I should be rooting for that. But when you're actually watching the games, it's so hard not to think I want Lee Keegan to run, I don't know, knock himself out running into Hill 16 because they've finally broken this duck, you know?
I was thinking there when we were talking about it, because I was like, right, the one thing we need to mention before we move off the final is Lee Keegan, because the man was getting whatever about sliding in and out in your knees, getting grass burns in the knee. The man got grass burns on his forehead from the way he was taking the game to Tyrone in that second half, the time he was pulled down. And like you also feel like you nearly feel bad. Like it's great to analyse the game and look at where it was won and lost. Same after the All-Ireland semi-finals as well. But at some point as well, you have to mention that like it's just like they're very, very fine margins, and like Mayo were in that game up until the end yesterday. Like you thought, something mad could happen and they could still come back and win it up until probably just like a minute into injury time. So like they've been there or thereabouts all the time, and it feels you feel nearly wrong analysing why they lost. You have to do it, obviously, and that's what the show's all about. But at the same point, it's just like, geez, sometimes you want to sit back and go, all those teams that have lost those finals, the amount of entertainment they've given us, the performances they've put in have been incredible. And at the end of the day, they just lost. Sometimes that's it. We had a great run, we played really well, we had a brilliant year, but we just lost.
And you talk about Dublin's regeneration, as you mentioned, it's a new team in many ways that have played 2 All-Ireland finals in a row, and it should stand to them. But at the same time, I keep thinking Lee Keegan is still their best player, and he's irreplaceable in the way that, I don't know, Stephen Cluxton's irreplaceable, that Jack McCaffrey is irreplaceable. Dublin lose the 2 of them and aren't winning and didn't win the All-Ireland anymore. You know what I mean? And it's just, you kind of wonder if regeneration is all well and good, but you're not going to get another player like Lee Keegan if you're Mayo. There's no reason to think Lee Keegan won't be there next year doing the exact same thing, by the way.
But I do think, Mick, when you think back on I think this is a nice bridge into the team of the year. When you think back on how much this one final would change your perception of certain Mayo players, like players you thought were definitely going to get an All-Star, and then they come into final and they lose. Like the best example of this was actually watching the Dublin Mayo game for me. Like it is so hard to look good in a losing team. Like when things are going against you, all-time great, some of the best footballers of my lifetime just look like distinctly average. And it's just inevitable when things are going against you. They're getting frustrated or doing things that look so uncharacteristic. And yet still, think about the amount of incredible Lee Keegan performances when Mayo haven't won. The draw game, that's frequently referenced. I thought yesterday the point he kicked, the fact that everything seems to be going wrong. Like Mayo, it was like a spectacular collapse. They just needed somebody to grab it by the scruff of the neck, and it ends up being their corner back, like romping forward and doing it. It's just such a
keeping the ball alive in the corner when he was surrounded by, I think, at least 6
how did he keep that ball? Yeah, I can't get over that. How did Conor Moyler, who's an unbelievable tackler, was on top of him, had his hand in twice, and somehow he managed to keep that ball. And this goes back to our point after all that he does all of that like incredible work, recycles the ball, gets the ball back to Durkin, ball goes back to, is it Brian Walsh, and Brian Walsh kicks the ball away. Like it just must be soul destroying for him. But I do think it just is a further emphasis of just how an all-time great Lee Keegan is. Not that anybody's going to argue that.
Let's talk about team of the year then, because we have a rolling All-Stars with PwC that we're going to finalize later in the week. But you two, back in the day, you were the main selectors on this team, so I'm definitely going to get your input. Let's have a look at the Sunday game team of the year that they picked, because I think football is a little bit open this year. Niall Morgan, I don't think anybody can complain about. Lee Keegan, Pádraig Campsey, Kieran Maguire and Peter Harte. Well, Kieran Maguire for sure, definitely, I would say, are walk-ins. So Sludden in the packs, especially Paddy Durkin and maybe Harte are probably worth talking about there. Matthew Ruan, I think, up until the final, probably did enough. Didn't have the best game and did get sent off. I thought Carl Kilpatrick, actually, if we can just come off this for a second, lads, is somebody that, like, the Tyrone midfield, and you'll see it in our Rolling All-Stars, has been underrated all year. They've been borderline anonymous in a way, and I thought yesterday they were like, both of them were superb, and I think maybe it is him that's going to be the one that kind of shone that little bit more. But actually, it was a real kind of coming out party for them yesterday.
Yeah, the two lads, again, and it's one of the things that you always talk about. I was like, Tyrone midfield, after the Kerry game and everything, you're like, Tyrone, no, they mightn't, if they break even around midfield, they'll be lucky, or they don't really care about midfield. And it's always been, this go back 20 years. And yet the amount of midfielders they've had that have actually put in incredible performances and brilliant players throughout that period. Like, there's so many of them. They're a different type of midfielder. Kilpatrick and Kennedy. I kept going Brian Donnelly, which is the name for my head was just got blank. But they're kind of more of a throwback to the normal type of midfield you would have. It was like the one that showed again in the start of the game that Kennedy caught for a chance. I think it was Sludden ended up putting it wide. He caught that running towards goal across it. It was really better than Kilpatrick's catch that ended up with goal. Like, they were two incredible. That's just two moments. Never mind their actual play throughout the year. Yeah.
Let's get back to the team here, because I'm realizing that I've nearly gone an hour with you guys after already talking to the boys earlier on. This is going to be the longest show of all time. Conor Myler, I think, is a guarantee. We'll come back to Paddy Clifford, Kieran Kilkenny, Darren McCurry, David Clifford, and Tommy Conroy are the full forward line that the Sunday game or the Saturday game or whatever it is decided to go for. Always an interesting team. It's very different than what we have on our Rolling All-Stars going into the final. Now, bear in mind, the final hasn't been taken into account there yet. We had Niall Morgan, we had Michael McKernan, who didn't make it, O'Hara, Lee Keegan, Kieran Maguire, and Gavin White from Kerry, Matthew Ruan, Diarmuid O'Connor in midfield, Conor Myler, Sean O'Shea, Tommy Conroy, Darren McCurry, Jack McCarron was surviving, and David Clifford was in for Paddy. Possibly an overreaction to the semi-final and the big games. David Clifford probably played well in all but one game, but Paddy Clifford, I don't know. There was conversations between him and Jack McCarron. Lads, can I make I think Jack McCarron is probably going to drop out one way or another in this team now before this. Can I make a case, my annual case for the super sub getting an all-star? I've done it every year. I've gone back to thinking that Kevin McMenamin was footballer of the year in 2011 and a hill I will die on forever. Colin McShane, you could argue, won the All-Ireland semi-final from the bench, and he scored a goal in the final from the bench yesterday that got Tyrone going and was that moment that sort of stretched out, and Mayo never looked like they were coming back from that. Colin McShane could have an all-star from the bench this year, or at least could be a nominee.
Yeah, I can't argue with you if I'm after saying we need to preview a new match at halftime every match. So if the players are as important, the players that finished the game, as the ones that started, then why isn't there an all-star? It should be an all-star team for starting 15 and an all-star team for finishing 15.
Oh yeah. God almighty, can you imagine? just giving more arguments to all-star teams if we did it that way. Maurice, do you have anyone in there that isn't in either team, or that isn't in our rolling all-star team that have to come in this week?
No, I do think I think Paddy Clifford, just watching back that semi-final during the week there, I think his performance was, I think he was criminally underrated by me personally. You know, he won ball and gave passes for chances that were squandered. He won frees that were missed. You know, I think that was one of the most frustrating things watching it back. I didn't realize how many frees Sean O'Shea missed in that game as well, that he dropped one short. Paddy Clifford wins the ball in his own 45, carries the ball to the opposite 45, is fouled, and it ends up being missed. So I thought he actually won the free kick, the extra time, the point to kick in extra time. That kind of instigated Kerry's whatever you want to call it, mini comeback at the time. So I thought he was really good. I would agree with your team in terms of this team, that Michael McKernan, I think, is more deserving than I would actually have him in over Durkin. I know it's probably I do think part of this, the problem is that there's a very, very conscious of going too heavy, to have 9 Tyrone players, the optics of that. Now, personally, I think you go on the form, like are you going to argue against 9 Tyrone players when they've beaten, what is it, 4 Division 1 teams now, plus the reigning Ulster champions? So I personally would have.
The way we keep saying that about Cavan, who are now in Division 4, because that doesn't sound great, so we just got it.
I didn't want to rub more salt into Mark's wounds there, but but otherwise, I think I would, but largely go along with that team. There's not too many qualms other than that.
Yeah, there's I suppose more discussion to come on that. Footballer of the year, then. Who are the nominees? Morgan, for me, I don't think he's going to get a thing, but I'd have him in there. And I think Conor Myler, and then
Kieran McGeary, probably.
It's Kieran McGeary. He's the next one? Yeah. I was thinking maybe McCurry. I wonder is Lee Keegan in the conversation as well? Like it's I don't know how brilliant he was in the Connacht Championship. I thought he probably lost a step, to be honest. But from his performance in the semi-final and final, you'd have to think Lee Keegan's at least in the discussion.
Yeah, they mentioned McGeary got it on the Sunday game or Saturday game last night, and they also mentioned Park Hampsey, who probably has a decent shout too. In fairness, like he man marked Thomas Galligan, and the Ulster champions captain. He man marked Conor McManus. He man marked Michael Murphy. He man marked Sean O'Shea, and last night he looked like he was on Conroy. But as well as doing all that, the 3 points he has kicked, like the point against Monaghan and the points yesterday, just on the outside of the right foot, was just outrageous. So he probably has a decent argument as well. I think I'd probably go with Myler, given how good he was in the final. But I also I wouldn't necessarily have too big an issue with the fact that they went with McGeary last night.
Yeah. You can read your piece, actually, Maurice's piece on Balls.ie about Park Hampsey and the best man marker in the country that you wrote, I think, before the All-Ireland semi-final. So that's one that you've actually has been borne out over the 2 big games of the year. Mark, who would you go for Footballer of the Year?
I don't know.
I know you hate picking one player. It's a team game, says Mark.
I've been swinging though. I was like, McGeary, did McGeary, I think, am I right to say, maybe it's just the social media I haven't followed, but I think Kavanagh might have mentioned him in the build-up to the semi-final. It was like, McGeary could be a shout for Footballer of the Year. And then it kind of just seemed to become a given that Kieran McGeary's Footballer of the Year. Like, McCurry had been absolutely, and that's not saying I'm not giving out, but McGeary could well be the Footballer of the Year. It's just funny the way when you see the things play out. McCurry was brilliant throughout the championship. He didn't have his best game against Kerry. He was kept very quiet against Kerry for a long period, then came into it. He scored, was it, 1-3 or 1-4 in the final? I just wonder, are we kind of underestimating him or underrating him slightly in terms of how well he's actually played throughout the year? But then at the same point, and then at the same point, I probably would have been leaning to, I was going to bed last night, I was like, right, Conor Myler's my player of the year. But then when Maurice is listed off Hampsey's, it's like, Jesus. Like, I mean, you can laugh at or defending Ulster champions, Maurice or whatever. But Thomas Galligan was an all-star, like, and he McManus, like, that's Mike. Oh Jesus, like, it's such a he's show up. Like, he probably scored more than all of them put together. He has to represent. So I don't know. I would like to pick up. I'd probably go with. I would be in charge of having to pick it for us. I'd probably go with. I think I'm going to go with McCurry. McCurry was like, seeing him in the. To be fair, I saw him in the flesh against Cavan, and he was electric. So that probably is giving me probably leaning that way for me as well. Even though that was the first round.
Yeah, the McGeary narrative is funny because doing the Rolling All-Stars every week and kind of having long discussions about this every Monday and Tuesday is like, McGeary was being singled out in every Tyrone match, but it was low key in a way. It was like you kind of thought, oh, he had a good game this day, it'll be Conor Myler the next day or whatever. Yeah. And then you realize, wait, we're having this exact same Kieran McGeary conversation every week. This isn't the one-off. He was the good one yesterday. He is doing it all the time, and his performances were actually stepping up, like, if anything. So yeah, I would tend to I think that in the bigger games, so Ulster final on, I thought Conor Myler might have been their best overall player in the last 3 games. And I think that's probably what counts the most. So, but then again, I'm dismissing the Donegal semi-final then as well. I don't know. Tough one. I wouldn't like to be picking either. Lads, we've taken nearly an hour of your time. I'm going to be sacked because this is like basically a 2-hour podcast at this stage. But thank you for answering the bat signal for our last county GAA embedded of the season. Anyway, get the old podcast crew back together and dissect it all.
No bother, lads. Look, what else would you be doing on a Sunday? Only listening to us ramble on about football.
There's nothing else to do. Go watch the Camogie final now.
Go out there and play it. Club
Get more
championship.
GAA into our lives. Thanks a million to Maurice and Mark. Cheers. And thanks a million for you for watching or listening, depending on what you're doing. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, please do subscribe to the channel. We're here with you every week. And of course, if you're listening to the podcast and aren't subscribed, please do so. Please also leave us a comment and a rating. That's the end of GAA Embedded for what it is for the county season anyway. Thanks a million to everybody for watching all the year, all through the championship. Thanks a million, obviously, to Darren O'Sullivan, to Shane McGrath for the hurling, and for all the guests that we've had on throughout the year. Again, thanks for you for watching. We will be back, of course. We're not going anywhere. This GAA season, it's not going away, you know. There's plenty more to come. It's just in a different format. But we'll talk to you soon.